Right, good morning all. Thank you very much for joining today. My name is Neil Van Rooyen. I'm with the pre-sales technical team at Moblicity. We're joining today with our secure partner, James Romer, the Chief Security Architect, will walk us through why two-factor authentication is not enough and how we can secure Office 365. Just moving along shortly, James, if you wouldn't mind changing the slide. Okay, just covering off the agenda. So we're going to give you a short introduction to Moblicity, the current landscape that we see with two-factor authentication and cloud security, why two-factor is a broken solution, how to increase security but improve the user experience, secure auth and interaction with Office 365, a brief demo of the product, and then we'll follow up with a summary. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer section on the website, and we'll answer them when we get to that section at the end. So moving on. So Moblicity, founded in 2009 as a mobile IT systems integrator. Why is that important? Well, it just shows that we've been around for a long time doing systems integration around the mobile IT and cloud services. What we do is we provide an end-to-end mobile and cloud service that incorporates everything from device management and secure access to cloud and corporate resources. In 2009, we were looking at the iPhone 3G, running iOS version 2. BlackBerry was still the leader of the mobile estate. So as you can see, things have changed quite dramatically from there. What we do, we help customers connect, manage, and secure their mobile devices. Those are the three pillars that we believe you need to have in place to be able to have a successful cloud-first and mobile-first strategy. And more recently, we've seen customers request fully managed solutions, so that is something that we're now looking to offer. Okay. We're very proud. We've just been ranked 69th in the Sunday Times Tech Track 100 of UK's fastest privately owned technology companies. This is over 3 years growth, so we're very happy, and as you can imagine, it's a great achievement for us at Moblicity. Okay. Some of the customers that have helped us achieve that record, we're quite big in financial and the legal, highly regulated industries, but we also touch on other verticals, including things such as defense with BAE, NATS, and some of the other big engineering firms too. So how do we go about it? Quickly, as I said, we deal with an end-to-end service delivery, so taking everything from devices of all shapes and sizes, carrier management around our core services. So we look at mainly enterprise wireless, identity and access management, mobile threat protection, cloud security and visibility, enterprise mobility management, and mobile content control. That's where we tend to focus around our core parts. Obviously, today we're going to be looking at identity and access management. Once we've got all those in place, we can then look at extended offerings and helping you connect, secure, and manage your devices and make sure that your connections to your cloud services and enterprise resources are secure and give you benefit. Okay. We offer those point technologies under one contract, one help desk, and one partner. So you only have one point of contact if you need to. We offer that in delivery, support, on-premise, in the cloud, and we can offer it as a fully managed. Right, I'm now going to hand over to James Romer. He's going to take us through Secure Auth as a partner. James, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to go through, as Anil outlined, some of the techniques that SecureAuth give you in protecting identities and managing applications such as O365. And we really start with the strapline that two-factor is not enough. We'll go through some of those reasons and some of the alternatives and methods of protecting identities before we talk about the application space. And I'll go into a brief demo of O365 and show you some of those techniques in practice. Okay, so where do we start? Well, we start with the security professional. Of course, the problem and the challenge that every security professional has is detecting who are the bad people and who are the good people, and also aligning the mechanisms with the business needs, aligning security practices with business requirements, embracing cloud applications, but also providing security to internal applications. So the challenge is growing, and unfortunately, those bad actors, their mechanisms are becoming more intelligent, and the security professional is becoming overwhelmed. So what do we do about that? Well, traditionally, we look at some of the third-party research in the market today, and it tells us that 63% of all security breaches involve use of valid user credentials. So we're really talking about username and password being compromised and on its own being utilized to access public-facing applications or maybe internal applications. The insider threat actually is possibly one of the biggest threat vectors. But the important takeaway is that 63% of those breaches are using valid credentials, so the correct credentials in the hands of the wrong people. 94% of malicious activity is coming from anonymous sources, so Tor exit nodes, anonymous proxies, anonymous VPNs. That's really important, of course, when we're starting to talk about applications such as O365 and protecting those applications in your tenanted space. We need to be aware of those intruders coming in from anonymous sources, and we need to be able to react to it. 94% is a huge, huge figure. Malicious, and that's Mandiant actually saying those requests are malicious, and there's a link to a report there if you want to go into that in more detail. The industry has reacted to these sorts of stats, and we've come up with a solution of standard two-factor. So there seems to be a rush at the moment to implementing a standard two-factor process. And of course, two-factor is much better than just solely relying on username and password. You have your something you have and the something you know barriers around your security perimeter, whether that be an application on-premise or an application in the cloud. But you know, the attackers and the bad actors, they still have capabilities to compromise those two-factor standalone static processes. The main issue being that it is a static process. The two-factor experience doesn't change for the end user and actually increases friction a lot of the time for an end user, and therefore human behavior dictates we will try and get around and do whatever we can to get around those security measures. And the attackers exploit that and make use of that, and therefore two-factor on its own is failing in a lot of organizations. So we talk about two-factor as a static process on its own not being enough. And that leads me into a quick disclaimer slide. What I'm going to show a few examples of where traditional two-factor approaches are failing, but we're not saying that two-factor shouldn't be used. What we're saying is that you should prove the identity before you get to the two-factor method. In other words, we can use very rich contextual information around a user's identity to present the most appropriate two-factor option to an end user. So removing a lot of the risk associated with static two-factor and presenting the most flexible and most applicable option at the point we need to. If we're not doing that, then we're in danger of rushing towards something that's already broken, mechanisms that have already been circumvented. So there's a few slides here that go into some of those traditional processes, if you like. And we start with hard tokens. So I'm sure anyone who's used a hard token has come across issues, you know, where they are quite annoying to use. The user experience is not great, and from an administration perspective, they can be quite a burden on a help desk in terms of provisioning and management, lost tokens, batteries losing power, etc. But also, you get into the world of crafty users sharing hard tokens. And I've been in certainly in my own experiences in organizations that have issued hard tokens to consultants and contractors, and a pool of contractors or consultants use those hard tokens. I've also been in situations and seen situations firsthand where project managers have been issued hard tokens for their pool of consultants and shared it over a webcam. You know, these sorts of processes happen in every large organization, really, a large enterprise. And unfortunately, it means that, of course, that hard token is really not being used to its best. It's being compromised by human behavior as usual, and those crafty users are getting around that security process. We then move into SMS. Now, SMS is probably one of the most common delivery mechanisms of OTP for a two-factor protection mechanism. The problem with SMS, as I'm sure everyone is aware, it has been shown to have weaknesses around the way the mobile providers connect to your mobile devices, and an engineer called Carsten Knoll managed to expose this weakness and has publicized it very well, documented it in 2014 actually. And this sort of hole, if you like, still exists today, and there is capabilities where you can start to snoop and sniff on SMSs and also voice calls and actually read them directly from a phone, which means that SMS OTPs that are delivered to a device can be scraped. There's also social engineering complications. You know, people being phished, one of the most common attack vectors, phishing emails into an organization, spear phishing in particular, going after a particular user's trust, sending them emails to build that trust and then eventually get them to relay an OTP to you as a bad actor. All these things are completely possible and happening every day. So SMS on its own has become deprecated by NIST as a result of these issues that exist. And as I say, I stress SMS on its own has been deprecated. And one of the main takeaways they have is that if you're sending an SMS OTP, make sure you never send it to a voice, a VoIP address, a VoIP number, sorry. It has to be to a registered mobile carrier number. So how do you check, how do you know where you're sending that SMS to? So it's these sorts of things that we need to start to consider if we are offering up two-factor via SMS. We need to consider all of the points and therefore make it a stronger form of authentication, not static and not on its own. KBQ, KBA, the knowledge-based question approach, still very prevalent out there in the market space. There are many issues around KBQs, really from the social engineering aspect. We're all using Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. We all have information out there, and typically those answers are related to our social information. Those questions that we're choosing, you know, it's not too hard to go and actually find information out about a user just over the internet. I mean, so obvious issues using that approach. And of course, users forget their answers. So therefore, you then need mechanisms to reset them. It's a burden potentially on the help desk again. And the user experience suffers as a result. And the last one I just want to focus on here is the push to accept mechanism. And we call this out because this really is the one that most organizations are now looking to as their first port of call for their two-factor alternative, or their two-factor preferred mechanism, sorry, if you want to put it that way. And the reason this is an issue is the false positive approach, the human behavior, wrongly accepting authentication requests. So blindly accepting, yes, that was me. Not really reading the small print, I guess, is a good way of putting it, which means that on its own, you are opening up the door to bad actors just sending requests to registered devices for a user, and they're just accepting those authentication requests blindly. There needs to be intelligence before you get to that stage. And last but certainly not least is the friction element. That user experience, the holy grail in security. The problem with all end users is that everyone is not created equal. Everybody wants a different experience, and nobody likes to be told you need to authenticate in a certain way, or today you need to use this mechanism, and that's the way you will be doing it for the rest of your life type of opportunity, if you like, the type of experience that introduces friction, pushback, which means that end users typically try to then circumvent those security measures. We need to be smarter than that. We need to be able to make decisions and judgments. Okay, so that's really the landscape as it is today. And you may be at this point thinking, what does this have to do with O365? And I am getting there. This is really more about, before we get to the application end, we need to be confident that the identity is the identity we need to come into our organization. You are who you say you are. So we talk about the solution. We've had enough doom and gloom. What do we need to do around these users' identities? We need to act as a doorman, and that's the the graphic you see on the screen there, a gatekeeper that recognizes people, makes it easy for the end users to come in and out of applications, but adjusts over time based on a risk score, based on patterns of access changing. And most importantly, we don't do this in isolation. We have to act as part of the community. So we need to be able to look into best-of-breed vendors for things such as compliance risk scores or user behavior analytics risk scores, and I'll come into that in a moment. So we talk about pre-authentication risk analysis. So this is where we're starting to build up a picture of the user's risk based around their identity using a layered approach. And this is before we get to that second factor option. So this is all about making sure that I as an identity coming into an organization is one we actually want to come into the organization. And based on that risk score, we can then introduce the most appropriate authentication mechanism and methods to that end user. So we look at a layered approach purely because it's defense in depth, gives us stronger security. There is no user experience impact at this stage, and that's really key to that user experience. From a friction perspective, we're only presenting the two-factor or multi-factor challenge when needed. We have 10 layers on the screen there, and I'll just very quickly go into each layer. So we start at the top, the device recognition element. Do we trust the device? Have we seen this user identity from this device before? Do we want them to come into the organization from that particular device? Look at the threat service. Very key when we're talking about external access. Is the user coming from an IP reputation that's marked as high risk, low risk, extreme risk, medium risk? Are they coming from an anonymous source, a Tor exit node, an unknown VPN, anonymous proxy? And actually, what's their geolocation? So we're looking at a complete IPv4 mapping to get the true geolocation through our threat service. We then look into the directory itself, and that may be a combination of many directories. It could be a combination of entitlements and attributes and groups, whatever really works in your organization. But we're starting to build up a true risk score here of the user and their identity as it equates to the particular business rules coming into your enterprise applications. The geolocation I mentioned works in conjunction with the threat service. We can take elements out of the browser as well, but of course on its own, without that true threat service, can be spoofed. You can get around geolocation rules on their own. So we combine those with our threat service. We then look at geovelocity rules, improbable travel events, geofencing rules, geographical barriers. And then we get into some more specialized areas such as fraud prevention. So when we talk about SMS on its own, this is where our fraud prevention techniques can look for things such as have numbers been ported recently? Are numbers voice over IP numbers? Are they true mobile numbers? Et cetera, et cetera. So building up these layers to protect those two-factor mechanisms and, more importantly, protect the identity. We then look into the identity governance. So when I talked about working as a community, a true ecosystem, this is where we would pull into a compliance engine to look for the risk associated with a user. Again, a very great indicator, a very rich indicator of whether a user should be stepped up at that point in time because they may have very high risk, very privileged accounts, high entitlements. We then look at the behavior analytics. So the usual processes, the usual access histories, something that happens outside of that normal behavior is an indicator of risk. And again, we pull into a community here, so into a behavior analytics tool such as Exabeam to give us a risk score back. All of this is creating an overall risk score for us to make a decision on. And then behavioral biometrics. So SecureAuth gives you the capability of applying continuous authentication techniques around the way I type on the keyboard, the way I use my mouse, all those sorts of techniques to give us an indicator of whether it is actually still me typing. Okay, so that's all great in sort of a very top-down layered approach, but how does that really work as an example? So this slide sort of goes through some of those layers to show how we can block at each phase, at each layer if you like, or step up requests. So the first one we start with is there's 94% of malicious requests coming from anonymous sources, the Tor browsers. the anonymous proxies, the unknown VPNs. We're just going to stop them at source. We're just going to block them completely. You could be stepping them up or redirecting them at this stage, but typically you would just be blocking them. Then you've got somebody coming from a location you don't trust. Well, let's just block them as well, or step them up or redirect them. And then maybe somebody's coming in from a device you don't trust. Again, the same rules apply. So we're starting to filter out any bad attempts or bad actors or things we don't trust or don't want to come into our organization at source. And we start to use these layers to give us that defense in depth, the behavioral biometrics. It's going to trap anybody typing incorrectly based on profiling of that user, and the UBA, the user behavioral analytics. Maybe I'm trying to access an application for the first time in the middle of the night. And that could be an anomaly, and that could be enough to say, actually, we're not going to allow that. But if I get through all those layers, we can then decide, okay, so which two-factor method is most appropriate based on your risk? So we've done all these sort of filtering out of the bad attempts, the bad actors, the bad noise, before providing the two-factor method. Okay, so that's all around the identity and really making sure that the people trying to access applications are valid identities, valid users, people you want to come in from devices you trust, from locations you wish to interact with IP reputations you trust, and not from anonymous sources. With that in mind, we can then present the user into an application, such as O365. So SecureAuth is a certified Microsoft partner to provide O365 integrations. There's a link on the screen there which describes the functionality through the WS-Fed, WS Trust model. And you'll see if you go to that link, and I'm sure we can send that to you, that we are fully compliant and can provide all the integrations that we need to, which means we can offer the rich, thick client support for all the well-known apps, as well as all the web-based support as well, and the mobile app access. So it gives you the true intelligent and adaptive access control based on application access once we've confirmed that identity. So we're acting as a true authentication broker here. Okay, so I do want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios from my browser acting as a good person, and then one scenario acting as a bad actor, if you like. And we'll see the different approaches and some of the different techniques we can provide to those flows. So to do that, I shall just flick into my browser here. And I'm actually just going to click a shortcut here, which is, for those that are interested in IDP and SP-initiated workflows, this is an IDP-initiated workflow, but it could be equally starting at the office end and redirecting to SecureAuth. So what we're seeing here on the screen is a SecureAuth workflow. So the user would be presented with an identity prompt, typically. In O365 world, that could be the email address, but actually, when SecureAuth is in control, it can be any attribute. It could be any piece of information. It could be an employee ID, could equally be a SAM account name, etc., etc. So I'm entering actually my SAM account name here. And in the background, SecureAuth is going away and saying, do we trust you? Do we trust the device? Do we trust the location? Do we know anything about you? In other words, have we seen an access before from this device? Do we have an access history around what you did last time? If we do, then great, we can make a decision on that. But if we don't, we obviously need to preview, and that's what's happening right here on the screen. So we're presenting back some options. So from a user experience perspective, we have flexibility to provide the best options at this point. So we're talking around some of those layers, we're removing the bad actors at source, and we're providing the second factor after we've made a lot of decisions here. So we can tailor this process. We see quite a few two-factor methods exposed, but actually that's purely because I just want to demonstrate some of those that's available. SecureAuth gives you over 25 methods of authentication with the product. We have 9 or 8 exposed here. So I can choose one of these. Typically they will involve maybe using a soft token, it could be a hard token, It could be a push to accept, or it could be using something that I've set myself through a previous workflow, such as a PIN that only I know, which could be a one-time use PIN, and then the second factor. And again, there's a password here. It doesn't have to be. We are seeing more and more requests to move away from password, and SecureAuth completely supports passwordless workflow. So once I've gone through that experience, I'm then presented into actually Outlook here, but the full Office suite. It's all done through the WS Federation protocol. If I click the Office 365 home button, it will show me the entire online account. So these are all now federated. I'm signed in, as you'd expect. So that authentication has been done by SecureAuth. And we've taken an access history, we've taken a device fingerprint, we've taken a lot of information from that process, which means if I just close down this browser, clear the session, go in again. So maybe the next day I come in, or maybe I've been for lunch, logged out, come back again. I enter my identity. Now this time, we actually prompt for password. And the reason for that is we're improving the user experience. So we're using all of the intelligent context information as the first factor. So we trust the device. I just logged in from here. We trust the location. We trust the IP reputation. It's all still the same. The access rules around my entire are still the same. I've still got the same group membership, same attributes, etc., etc. So we're stepping down the user. This could be stepping down to another method, if you wish. Could be something that's easier, like a push to accept, maybe at this point, based on the fact we've already utilized all that intelligence information to make sure, with a certain degree of confidence, that I am the correct user. Or it could be that the typical password approach is completely flexible. So the user experience becomes streamlined. So unless something changes, so maybe I was using a laptop and I move outside onto a different network, we would obviously step the user up. We wouldn't trust that access history anymore. So you can start to build real flexibility into workflows to improve the user experience. Okay, so that's all quite straightforward from a SecureAuth perspective. I'll just click that. Now, if I was doing this from a Tor browser, just trying to update my Tor browser. Now, if I was trying to update that from a Tor browser, let me see if I can get in. Here we go. So here we have a Tor browser. And if I check, you can see here I'm currently connected to a Tor exit node that's making me appear from Moldova, which is interesting. You know, essentially, that this is one of the common attack vectors that a hacker would use or a bad actor would use. I mean, there can be legitimate reasons, of course, for using Tor exit nodes, but typically most enterprises, you know, would want to at least know that these are coming into your organization. Let me just restart this. Okay, so what we see here is me trying to get into that same workflow, and our analyze engine is saying, actually, you're not coming any further, we're going to block you at source. And that's because we can detect it's coming from that anonymous source. We know the business rule on the workflow is saying we don't want that to come into our organization. Now, what you can actually do is enable this option, but not actually block, just step up the user, or you can redirect them somewhere else, or you could just log the fact that an access attempt has been made from an anonymous source into your syslog or SIM infrastructure, which means you can then start to correlate and create policy around these sort of attempts, and then decide later on whether you want to maybe block certain access from certain locations and certain anonymous sources. Okay, so flicking back into the presentation here, we went through those three use cases. The browser access from the untrusted device, from the trusted device after authentication initially, using the access history, the geolocation, all those sorts of good things, and the threat service, and then trying to access the same workflow, but from a Tor browser. And that works for sort of anonymous proxies, unknown VPNs, etc. as well. Now, what can we do with this great information? Well, we become proactive. As I mentioned, we can start to correlate, create policy, define new business rules in the workflows based on what we see coming in. But importantly, we can provide the most appropriate two-factor option. So it doesn't have to always be that, oh, use a push to accept, use a hard token, use a soft token. Based on the risk and based on the application somebody's trying to get to, you can define which authentication option is the most appropriate at that point in time. And by filtering out the bad actors as much as possible, you're actually providing resilience around that two-factor method to get away from those issues that we exposed on the initial slides around the failure of two-factor mechanisms. Now, once the user's in, you're not saying, let's give them the keys to the kingdom. You know, typical authentication, two-factor authentication, is once the user is in, it's hands-off. The authentication vendor's out of the picture, they've signed the user in, and then whatever else happens, they may be getting SSO everywhere. That of course, is a dangerous thing to be doing if you can't apply continuous authentication. So with SecureAuth, we give you that capability to keep control of the identity as they move laterally around applications. So not only do that upfront intelligent authentication, we're always doing the continuous authentication afterwards as well. You can start to use some of these metrics and policies and authentication attempts to automate actions such as locking user accounts, maybe automatically resetting passwords, maybe just emailing administrators or logging to the SIM, etc. But also we can allow valid identities to utilize self-service tools. So again, the user experience becomes improved because we're empowering them to actually take on board, maybe introduce some new authentication options based on profile attributes, such as personal email address to receive an OTP or maybe a personal mobile number, those sorts of things, because we now have confidence that the person is who they say they are. So just to summarize from the SecureAuth perspective, you know, two-factor on its own is not enough. You know, we can prove, and it's well documented, a lot of the standalone two-factor mechanisms can be circumvented. They do introduce user friction. And for that reason, you really need to be looking at adaptive access control, building in intelligent workflows, making sure that you have flexibility to not only improve the user experience, but using the layered risk analysis, derive the security profile to increase the security overall. So you're no longer looking at authentication workflows for one app always being the same. You're actually looking at workflows changing based on an individual's risk score, based on maybe their groups, their risk profile, the device they're using, making sure that you're providing the best options, but also filtering out all the bad actors at source. Okay, so I will pass back to Neil now. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thanks, James. So just covering off what we've just seen, as SecureAuth has said, two-factor authentication on its own is not enough. So how can Moblicity help you? We can work and deliver this as a managed solution within your environment. So currently we have 3 managed service offerings, managed wireless, so that's a full wireless from deployment, management, monitoring, support. Managed mobility, the same offerings. We can host it privately in our private hosted cloud, or we can use the Mobile Alliance cloud offering. But what we're starting to see a great takeoff now, and this is where SecureAuth steps in, is we're offering a managed security service. Most of the time we will see this being hosted within the organization's DMZ and environment, but we're starting to see now that we're getting requests to have this as a hybrid solution. So some servers hosted within your DMZ and other servers hosted within our privately hosted cloud to minimize the threat vector going into your environment. So you're not having to allow access from the internet into your environment, and it's going to be locked down to a range of IP addresses. Any other questions with regards to that, please do get in contact, but we do offer the full service, so everything from installation, design, reporting, monitoring. We have a service delivery team, technical account managers that will work with you on an ongoing basis. It's a 24/7 operation, and we can offer up to 5 nines availability as a service level agreement. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it for today. If you have any questions, please do drop them into the question and answer fields on the website. James, we do have one question currently. You mentioned you can support rich Office clients. For an Office 365 app on a mobile, what hooks do Microsoft provide to break out to an authentication application?
Yeah, so great question. So utilizing basically ODEL or modern authentication, we can trigger a passive authentication request direct from the app, which means that the authentication request is passed to SecureAuth or the IDP, whatever it may be. It's all standards-based redirection using WS-Fed protocol and fully supported by Microsoft through the O365 mobile app as well as a browser.
Okay. Just going to give it a few more minutes in case people have any questions and they're just typing them in. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions come through, so I think that's it for today, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. If you do have any questions or would like to have a further discussion, please get in contact with us at Moblicity, either through your account manager or inquiries@moblicity.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.